πρώτη παρουσίαση και keynote speaker της ημέρας είναι από την AirDNA, The Power of Data. Τα data διαδραματίζουν πολύ σημαντικό ρόλο στις κρατήσεις, στο σχεδιασμό, στη στρατηγική και των επαγγελματιών που έχουν λίγα σπίτια, αλλά και καταλύματα, αλλά και των εταιριών διαχείρισης. Η παρουσίαση αυτή θα διαρκέσει από τις 10 έως 10:30. Και εδώ θα ήθελα να καλέσω την Aimee Trusler, International Sales Manager της AirDNA, για να ξεκινήσει την παρουσίασή της. Aimee. Aimee, welcome in Greece.
Kalimera. So we all know that the short-term rental market has exploded in size over the past decade. In fact, a lot of people in this room have probably contributed to that success. But what you might not know is short-term rentals now account for over 15 cents of every single dollar spent on lodging worldwide, and are growing at almost double the rate of hotels. When we compare this to the real estate or long-term rental market, which we've watched steadily evolve over multiple decades, short-term rentals have evolved rapidly in just 11 years since Airbnb first began. Because this industry is evolving so rapidly, it's becoming more and more important for property managers to reach newer levels of professionalization. There are a few ways that we can do this, and what we're going to talk about today is how to utilize the power of data to scale your short-term rental business. For those of you who aren't familiar with AirDNA, we are an independent data company who scrapes Airbnb and HomeAway. We track every single individual listing on a global scale, and we can tell you what any of these listings are earning in terms of occupancy rate, average daily rate, and revenue. To give you a little bit of backstory about how AirDNA began, it all started when our CEO, Scott Shapford, was going traveling overseas indefinitely. His neighbor recommended to him to put his property in Santa Monica on Airbnb for rent. Now, Scott realized pretty quickly what an amazing opportunity this was when the money started rolling in. But what he also realized was that there was a huge gap in the market for data analytics. He didn't know how to benchmark against his competitors. He didn't know how to set his pricing. He had no idea what was going on in the market. And that's where the idea of AirDNA was born. Fast forward a few months, and imagine our 4 co-founders sitting in a garage in Santa Monica, coding away, not sleeping at all, definitely drinking way too much caffeine, and tracking every single listing in the United States. Fast forward to today, and we now have access to every single listing globally, not just on Airbnb, but also on HomeAway. We can help you to set your pricing by forward-looking information. We can see, going 12 months ahead, what the demand is in any given market and what other hosts are pricing their properties, so you can set competitive rates. We can help you to prospect for new locations by identifying emerging markets, markets that are unsaturated and earning a lot of money, and also markets that are now growing. We can see this for any single market all over the world. This is an example of our Market Minder tool. It's an online interactive dashboard that showcases high-level market information, supply and demand trends, market trends, as well as forward-looking pricing, as discussed. So, let's take a look at Greece as a market by using this data. What we can see here in growth rates from 2018 versus 2019 is a huge increase in available listings and book nights. But what we can also see is a decrease in occupancy and RevPAR. What this suggests to us is that Greece is at a point of critical. It's heading towards market saturation, which is an indication that supply is much higher than the demand. So this doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing, but what it does mean is that it's more important now than ever to professionalize your listings to stay ahead in such a competitive market. So putting together this information was really exciting for us. For anyone who was here last year and you saw our CRO, Tom Caton, give this presentation, you can see that this year's markets to watch are completely different to last year. Now, what does that tell us? It's a perfect showcase of how rapidly this industry is growing. These markets might not be markets that you would think, but we can see that they've increased massively over the last year. With Andros, for example, has a 25% increase in daily RevPAR. So when we talk about market saturation in Greece, this doesn't necessarily mean that the market as a whole is saturated. What it might mean is the top markets, let's say Athens, for example, is expanding faster than the demand. So it's now your opportunity to identify other markets in Greece where you can start to invest and get ahead of the game before it becomes saturated. Another important metric to watch is channel distribution. So why is this important for you? If we take a look at Crete as a perfect example, we can see that the top cities, okay, Crete Airbnb is 17,000 upwards, whereas HomeAway is only 5,000. Let's say you're listed only on HomeAway in a market like Crete. What this means is you are missing out on an extreme amount of bookings by not being on both platforms. This also helps you to track user behavior, okay? So some guests only like booking on Airbnb, some guests only like booking on HomeAway. In markets such as, let's say, Rhodos, for example, we can see that it's a relatively even split. So it's very important to be on both channels, or the channel that is at least most important and popular in your market. A few years ago, short-term rental satisfaction was down in a big way. We could see that people were decreasing the usage of short-term rentals. This is based on Skift research in 2018. But we can see now in more recent statistics that short-term rental demand is going up. We can see that a large percentage of people have stayed in a short-term rental in the last 2 years versus 2017 and 2018. We can see the preference of travelers for traveling outside of the US. So people are traveling to more international locations. We can see a large increase and a decrease within the US. And we can see a 10% increase in people staying loyal to brands. So that means HomeAway, Airbnb, maybe your property management company name. People like to stay with names that they know, and that's why it's becoming more and more important to build your brand. So let's talk a little bit about professionalization. Succeeding in a professionalized industry requires localized short-term rental data, okay? Knowing what's going on in your market is going to help you stay ahead of the game. Let's take a look at Athens as a perfect example. So what does professionalization mean? This means being available 365 days of the year. This means reaching an occupancy rate upwards of 50%. This means having booked days more than half of the year. So if we look at Athens compared to, let's say, a highly regulated market like Barcelona, for example, Barcelona typically has around 30% of multi-host listings that manage over 65% of properties. What this says to us is that Athens has a huge amount of growth in professionalization. If you can increase your multi-listing capacity, if you can be available more time in the year, and increase those book days by setting your pricing correctly at the right time, you can help move into that market. So at AirDNA, for every single market, we give it a market grade. Okay? What this tells us is what kind of mix that it has of these typical metrics. So we can say, what is rental demand for this market? Is it growing? Is it decreasing? Where does it fall on the scale in terms of the top 2,000 markets? Revenue growth. We track the annual growth year over year to see how the revenue is growing in a market and identifying if it's a growing or declining market. Seasonality. Okay, this is something that most of you would be very familiar with in Greece. There are a lot of highly seasonal markets. What we do is we make this on a scale, see if this market is highly seasonal, let's say under or over 3 months of the year. And what is the regulatory presence? So is there a regulation? Is it strong? Is it low? Is it existing at all? And then what we do is we give it a market grade. So the market grade is not an indicator of whether this market is going to make you the most money, but it's an indicator of if it is a stable market based on these metrics. We can see now how much money has been generated in Athens year over year. So you've got a breakdown by each month. You can see the increases and declines. We might be able to attribute some of these increases on seasonal events, compression nights, festivals, conferences. That's why it's important to know ahead of time what is going on in that market so you can set your prices early on. So, booking lead time. For those of you who don't know what booking lead time is, this is how far in advance your guests are booking. The reason this is important is if you know when your guests are booking, you can set your price ahead of time to increase your price for events like we just spoke about. So a great example of this is, let's say there's a conference on, so the B&B guest conference. If you knew 6 months ago that companies were booking accommodation here 3 months in advance, you can already start to set your prices at a higher level. Why this is important is in such a competitive market as we've seen, if you're not ahead of the game and knowing what is going on in your market, you're not only missing out on bookings, but you're also losing a lot of money. So we can see here a breakdown of each month, how far in advance people are booking. For Athens, as an example, the average booking lead time is 40 days prior to the stay. So let's take a look at some comparative booking behavior, so Athens versus other markets. So we can see here that the highest amount of markets tend to be booked within 1 to 3 months in advance. What this says is it's a more stable market. People aren't booking 7 to 12 months in advance, which means that you don't need to set your pricing as far ahead as that. What we can do is then take a look at what's going on in the next 1 to 3 months and understanding what people are booking and what the asking price is. So this is a really great example of how you can use pricing to identify when to set your market. So we've taken a single day, so May 24th as an example here. Now, whilst we can see that the occupancy rate is only 9% at that time, it's important to remember that our data is based off real-time information. So even though at this point in time, the occupancy rate is 9%, we know based on historical market behavior that this is an incredibly high demand day. Why is that? It's Easter. Okay, so what we can see is that already people don't know that they can set their pricing ahead, and this gives you an extra step ahead of the competition in being able to set your prices for Easter in advance. Another really great thing to think about is where your guests are coming from. So again, why is this important for you? When we talk about the competitive market and why professionalization is so important, knowing where your guests are coming from is incredibly important. We can see that the top domestic city is Athens, followed by Thessaloniki, and the top international is London. Particularly if you're in a market where the native language isn't commonly spoken in other places in the world. The way that you can use this information is 1, to set translations for things in your property. 2, to make sure all your emails and communications are in the native language of the guest. And 3, you can also use this to track user behavior. So you know what time of year certain nationalities are traveling, and you can target your marketing directly based on that. So another great way to utilize this data, for each city that we have in the Market Minder tool, you'll have a drop-down list of all of the neighborhoods within that city as well. So you can then start to benchmark for profitable locations. So we can see we've got multiple KPIs that we can filter by, whether it's listings, daily rate, occupancy, revenue, or market grade. And we can then start to benchmark these markets against each other to understand where are the best markets to start to invest. So let's talk a little bit more about the markets for Greece and ways that you as a property manager can really utilize this information. Market saturation doesn't necessarily mean that the market is going to stop growing. What this means is that the growth is going somewhere else. It means that we can start to utilize data to identify top markets, decide where we might want to invest next, and understand key market trends to stay ahead of the board. Professionalization. So I've spoken a lot about how this market is so competitive and how you can become a more professionalized host. We're seeing more and more property managers integrating tech solutions and data technology into their daily purposes. This might be dynamic pricing tools, it might be data analytics, it might be something as simple as a tech solution. But why this is important is it helps streamline the processes and takes away time that you're spending behind a computer, aimlessly scrolling away, to put more focus into your business and ways that you can create a better guest experience. Talking about competitive analysis, what this data also allows you to do is to benchmark against your competitors. You can track other listings that are similar to your property, so you can filter by different property types. Let's say you've got a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom listing. You can take a look at other listings that are exactly the same criteria and see where you fall on the scale of your competitors. We also track things like different types of amenities, so you can see what the demand is from guests for, let's say, heating or AC or a pool. And you can identify if you have these, if you can easily implement any of these amenities to help get the next step. At AirDNA, we are huge advocates for making data-driven decisions. It's the foundation of our company. It's what helped our CEO to become what it is today. It's what helped AirDNA to become one of the top data providers in the world. And it's something that we are so passionate about. Let's use Sonder, Vacasa, Hostmaker as great examples, some of the top property management companies in the world, who we've seen start with 2 or 3 listings and go up to upwards of thousands in only a matter of years. We've grown with these companies. We've seen how powerful having data can work. We work with these companies to help you understand how you can scale your business. We understand what your goals are, where you want to grow to, and what kind of business you want to be. And we want to grow with you on that. Thank you so much for starting your morning with me. I'm really happy to be here. I'm here with my colleague Tom as well. You can see us walking around. Tom is wearing an AirDNA t-shirt, and we will be here tomorrow, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions you have. Now, I think we might have a little bit of time, so I'm not sure if we have any questions from the audience, if that's something you want to do. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you please elaborate more on, you said that market is saturating, but you said this is an opportunity because it is getting somewhere else. Can you please elaborate more on that?
Absolutely. So what we found in this study of the market saturation in Greece is that the amount of listings available is much higher than what the demand is, which is driving down the average daily rate in the RevPAR. So this can not necessarily be a negative thing. It allows you to be able to start looking at other locations that you can get into. So what you want to identify is markets with a high average daily rate or a high annual revenue, but a lower amount of book listings. What this indicates is that it's a high potential market, a high earning market, but there's not that much competition in that market at the moment. So what's the key thing to do with these markets is to get in early before it becomes at a level of saturation. So if you're one of the beginning properties in a market that, let's say, has 500 listings, so I think Andros, for example, has about 1,000 listings, but it's earning a lot of money year over year. So you want to get in there early, become one of the professionalized listings there, potentially become a potential multi-listing host if you have the resources to do so. And that's getting ahead of market saturation. It's an unsaturated, high potential market, and you want to get ahead of that as soon as you can. So this would be looking for, again, a market with high earning potential, but a lower amount of booked listings. So a higher demand than supply. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
My reservations are 85% from Booking and only 15% from Airbnb or HomeAway. your resources are mainly from Airbnb and HomeAway. Maybe some more Expedia or something more. I don't know.
Yeah.
But Booking took a lot of this market, and you miss this data. How you face this problem?
Sure. So we have actually been collecting Booking.com data for about 12 months now. The most important thing to us is to make sure that the data is at the highest level of accuracy. We know that people are making decisions for their business off this data, so we need to make sure that when we do integrate Booking.com data, it's at the same level of accuracy as our Airbnb and HomeAway. So the reason why this is taking a little bit longer is the way that the Booking.com calendar and reservation calendar works is a little bit different to the way Airbnb and HomeAway does. So what we do at AirDNA is we identify listings that are on multiple platforms, and we then deduplicate those listings to make sure there's no double counting. The process of deduplication from Booking.com to HomeAway and to Airbnb is quite a long process, and it's complicated, but we are working on it. It's in our game plan for 2020, and we've got the data there. It's just a matter of making sure that it's at the level of quality that our users deserve. Yeah. No? Anyone else? Okay. Thank you so much. And again, please feel free to come and say hi to me or Tom. Tom is wearing an AirDNA t-shirt. We will be here today and tomorrow. And we're more than happy to sit down with you and take a deeper dive into your individual markets as well. Thank you.